Ninja is probably my favorite job in Final Fantasy XIV, but that doesn't mean I think it's perfect. In fact, I think there's a lot of things that could be done to make Ninja even more cool. Hello Void, it's Eldon, and today we are going to be talking about Ninja, moving into 8.0. This is going to be the start of a brand new series. You see, 14 has promised that with the next expansion will come some pretty significant changes to the job system. Now, they can't say something like that and not get my hopes up. Our goal today is to talk about, well, in this case Ninja, but for the series, a job in general, and see what room there is to add things. If you want to see more of these kinds of videos and if you enjoy, please subscribe because, well, I have at least 20 more of them to go. I already have a couple of videos on this channel talking about my opinions on the overall state of the job system. To summarize, I think that over the past couple of expansions, 14 has stuck way too close with the same model of job design. One that is good for what it is, but quintessentially flawed. And has grown even less usable over time, growing stale from a lack of change. At this point, they need to make a major overhaul, and anything less than that will leave me just a little bit disappointed. Now, personally, I think a lot of jobs at present are pretty good, but I still think that even with the best jobs, there's a lot of room for improvement, for diversification. Right now, most of the jobs are sort of a mess. A few expansions ago, Square hit a decent stride, with I'd say at least most of the jobs. And since then, they have expanded on that system that they had going, adding on more bits and making the systems that existed really complicated with a bunch of loose odds and ends stapled on. At this point though, most of those extra bits can be shaved off, leaving room for newer, more interesting systems that play more with what we conceive of as a Final Fantasy XIV job. Now, I'm not gonna lie, my ideas are generally quite experimental, and they only have to exist in my mind, but at the end of the day, it's just kind of fun to think about and stretches my design muscles, and hopefully sparks some interest in you. So we're gonna go through it, because I think it's fun. To start out, we are going to be talking about my favorite job, Ninja. And yeah, I think Ninja is my favorite job. I'm not a die-hard Ninja one-trick, but it's probably the job I play the most. Ninja is all about speed. It is a job built around pressing as many buttons as you can in as short a time period as possible. Every minute you're going to have a ton of abilities off cooldown, and you're going to try and press all of them in your 15-second trick attack window. And that's the fun of the job. Honestly, Ninja is a bit dull outside of those 15 to 20 seconds, but that's kind of the point. You go really hard in this short burst phase, and then have a bit of time to recover. You build back up your resources, be a little bit patient, and then when your buff window rolls around, you go all in. Unlike something like Viper, which presses buttons quickly as well, Ninja is all about pressing a bunch of different buttons, about weaving in all of these different systems into one quick burst phase, where you have so much to do and not enough time to do it. If you can use all of these different tools effectively, you create one of the most satisfying burst phases in the game. And that means if I'm looking at Ninja with the perspective of 8.0, our goal is simple. We want to maintain this burst phase with having a multitude of different tools that can each contribute to it being as effective and as interesting as possible. You should be having a ton of different stuff that you have to bring together and fit into a small window of time. And with that goal being stated, the only thing we have left to do now is, well, look at our kit. Alright, here we have the Ninja kit. We have all the skills listed out in a classic tier list form. Come on, we love a tier list. Here's how I'm going to break down the tier list. S tier is going to be for perfect abilities. Everything that is ideal, that really doesn't need a single change, can go right here. A tier is going to be for close. Those are abilities that are basically flawless. Sometimes they might have a little bit that they could work on, but they contribute to the job identity and are in a fun and unique implementation. B tier is going to be for fine abilities. These are abilities that are okay, and we can cut if we need to, but aren't really on the major chopping block. And finally, C tier, we are going to have for disappointing. These are abilities that we don't really like, that abilities that kind of fail to live up to the standard of the job. Fortunately for Ninja, I don't think there's going to be too many of those abilities here, because Ninja's a very well put together kit, but we'll still see. Lastly, we also have Core. These are just abilities that are defaults to every job, and we can put one in there right now. Throwing Dagger is a core ability. Same thing really with the 1, 2, 3 and AoE combos. Every job has this, and I don't expect it to change too much. The one thing I will say though is this ability, Armor Crush. Honestly, I like what they did with it, adding the daggers. I think the buff management section of Ninja was interesting, but not necessarily core to its kit. So creating the interesting dagger system actually ended up working out pretty well. Now we have Trick Attack. Trick Attack is perfect. Trick Attack is the ideal that Ninja is built around. It is what creates the idea of our burst window. We have 15 seconds every minute where we have to go off. Honestly, I preferred it back when Trick Attack was a raid wide because it felt like we were a little bit more useful. But with the 2-minute meta rolling around, we were left with our mug window. I'm gonna put mug here. Do I want to put Dokumori at the same level as mug? I think so. I think Dokumori and mug, they're the same ability. And Dokumori is just the ninja-fied version of it. I'm okay with what Ninja is as far as not being Thief. I know there are a lot of people who really like the idea of Ninja as Thief, but if it's called Ninja, we can have it have the weird ninja names without too much of an issue. Alright, now we have the perfect ability. This is the actual core of Ninja's kit, and my favorite part of Ninja. Tenchi Jin, the Mudra system, is perfect for what Ninja wants to be. Ninja is a job about pressing a lot of buttons really quickly, and creating an ability that makes you press 4 different buttons in order to do the equivalent of pressing 1 button is brilliant. You're pressing so many buttons so quickly, you feel like you're entering the Matrix because you are actually casting these abilities. You are actually summoning up this power. It feels Naruto as hell, and it increases the button presses per minute of Ninja in a really interesting way that doesn't end up bloating the kit with a bunch of random disposable filler OGCDs. Now, all of the Mudra abilities are also pretty interesting. The Fuma Shuriken is fine. It's kind of basic, but it gets the job done. I don't really have any issue with our tier 2s. Katon is pretty neat, Raiton is pretty cool, and Hyoton is fine. But Hyoton is actually made perfect by Hyosho Ranryu, which we'll get to in a moment. Huton is mid. Like, I understand that removing the buff element of Ninja meant that this ability didn't really have a purpose, and creating an AoE version of Suiton is okay, but we don't need it. Like, it doesn't feel great. And Doton is pretty cool. I think it's kind of actually perfect. It's a very unique ability, only really Dark Knight has an equivalent, and it feels like another tool in Ninja's toolbox. Now, Kasatsu, this is the ideal expansion of the Mudra system. It gives you another use and also changes your target. Generally speaking, the Mudras are a solved system. If you're just going for damage, you go for Raiton. If you want to activate Trick Attack, you go for a Suiton or a Huton. However, when you use Kasatsu, it changes your goal. It makes you want to go for Hyosho Ranryu. It means that Hyoton is not a useless button. It's just one you want to avoid, and you want to change up when you have Kasatsu. It's a genius way to make all of the Mudra abilities actually matter. Now we move on to the Ninki gauge system, and I think it's fine. The Ninki buttons are all really neat. I love Bava Kakra, I love summoning the big toad, but I don't really think that either of these are unique to Ninja. The Ninki gauge is just another gauge spender. Literally 90% of the jobs have some generic bar that counts from 0 to 100, and for Ninja, it's fine. The upgraded skills, despite their animations being really cool, I don't really think add too much. I don't love that it's locked behind Dokumori. I think it's always weird when I press that, especially because of the way the ninja burst phase lines up. You end up just having this holding on, and you often cap on your resource. Actually, I'm putting Dokumori below. I think it doesn't feel better than Mug when we have to use these. They're a neat finisher, but they don't really add to the kit too much. Now, Bunshin. Bunshin is pretty cool. I think Bunshin is super neat. I love how it's on a 90-second cooldown, even in the 2-minute meta, and I just think it is super fun. Same with Phantom Kamae Itachi. It just looks so cool. Alright. Forked Raiju and Fleeting Raiju are epic skills. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about. I love that these make it so you never actually have to press your 1, 2, 3 inside of your burst window. Because of the way the burst window ends up being set up, you press enough Raitons that you can press your Raijus at the same time as you're using all of your OGCDs. Hollow Nozuchi is swell. I think it's just a cool skill. It makes it feel cooler, and it's a nice payoff for Doton. Alright, now we come to our assassinations and our dream within a dream. This might be a hot take. I think these skills are fine. I like having really cool off GCDs, especially for Ninja, which is all about pressing a lot of buttons really quickly. But just having a 60-second cooldown OGCD is never going to be my favorite. It's not disappointing, but it's only ever fine. Tenchi Jin is neat. I don't think it does the same for me as Kasatsu, but it is a good way to just have more of your Mudra abilities happening in a burst phase. And it's the closest Ninja comes to a true finisher move, so that's fine. The Tenchi Jin finisher is neat. It's just more fluff to go into the thing. I don't love Meisui. I think it's not cool. I think if Meisui was tied to getting your Zeppo Meppo and your Death Frog medium, then that would be better, but at this point it's literally just an extra gauge and a way to spend the sneak buff that you are always going to get when you use Tenchi Jin. It's a filler skill that ends up not really adding and just sort of enabling the button pressiness. Shikuchi. Wait, this is another core abilities. These are both core. Shikuchi and Shade Shift. These are just core abilities. Maybe Shade Shift could have an interaction with something like a NIN key, but that's not necessarily necessary. And finally, Hide. Hide is the most interesting ability on Ninja's kit. This is one of like 3 abilities in the game that is just not supported by the game it's in. It's super cool. It might be one of the coolest abilities in the game, but at the same time, it's almost useless, and it doesn't feel great to use, and there's no real opportunity to use it. I like how it gives you your mudras back. I think that's really cool. I like how it theoretically enables you to use your trick attack window. But I just don't know if it's there. There's not any situation where I'm out in the overworld and I feel like I need to use Hide. I think the only point I use Hide is when I'm bored, like when I want to sneak around or feel like I'm doing something cool. The game, oh, and of course in exploration zones, but that's way too niche. I think Hide could be the most interesting ability on Ninja's kit. I think there could be some really cool stuff with it, but at this point, I just can't put it anywhere higher than disappointing. It's a loose end that they should not cut, but that ends up not feeling like it should. It ends up not feeling like the coolest part of Ninja's kit. So honestly, we're left with a really decent core. Ninja has way more perfect skills than any other type of skill, and the baseline they've been set up with is really cool. If I were going to remake Ninja in 8.0, I wouldn't want to change much, but I think there is something that could definitely be done. I think if I were to remake Ninja for 8.0, if I wanted to make it a job that stands truly alone amongst all the other jobs, my goal would be to make Ninja the buff job. Not the buff the party job, not even the buff yourself job. I would make Ninja the get buffs to enable skills job. What do I mean by this? Well, I think that in the same way that using Suiton gives you the buff that allows you to use your trick attack, Ninja should have similar buffs that allow for you to use many different abilities. And in doing this, Ninja should also get rid of the NIN key gauge. I'm sorry to say, I just don't think the NIN key gauge is like the coolest part of Ninja's kit. I think the count to 100 method of the NIN key gauge is fine, but it makes it feel way more like every other job, and there's so much they could do instead. Here's my take on it. What we'd want to do is have all of the different abilities that are currently assigned to the NIN key gauge, as well as some others, be assigned to buffs you get through using your mudras. In the same way we have our Raijus with Raiton, we can have similar abilities across every single mudra. Start off with, I think we can change our basic daggers. Same way as works currently, Armor Crush gives you 2 daggers. However, when you use Aeolian Edge, you don't spend the daggers, but you unsheath them. An unsheathed dagger can be used to cast Bava Kakra. It means that over the course of every minute, you're building up towards having as many Bava Kakras as you can spend in the time frame of your burst window. Additionally, using a Fumo Shuriken would immediately give you an unlocked blade, which means you're always going to get an extra OGCD every time you use Tenchi Jin. This change with the daggers allows for both Hellfrog Medium and Bava Kakra to stay, but it leaves out Bunshin. I think there's a pretty easy solution to this. Huton gives you a Bunshin Ready charge, or an equivalent buff. This changes the way we would use Tenchi Jin in our burst. Instead of using Tenchi Jin to get an extra hidden for Meisui, instead we are reversing our Tenchi Jin and counting down to Huton so that we can activate Bunshin. Also, we're cutting Meisui. We don't need a NIN key gauge increaser when we don't have the NIN key gauge. Tenchi Jin is also sticking around. It's just a neat way to be able to press all these buttons. And if we are making Ninja the get your buffs ready job, then having an ability that lets us get 3 different buffs ready while also dealing damage is just a really efficient use, so we'll keep Tenchi Jin around. For our tier 2 Mudra abilities, we're just gonna model each of them after our Raijus. We use Katon for AoE, we get AoE versions of the Raijus. If we go for Hyoton, then we'd get something interesting, maybe something a little bit spicier. My idea would be you get 3 stacks of a really short cooldown ability that would let you dash to 3 different targets. It could be useful for very specific amounts of AoE or just for navigation, but there's tons of ways you could do it. At the same time, as we keep Kasatsu around, now whenever we use Kasatsu and whenever I upgrade Kasatsu abilities, this is where we would add in our new, bigger finisher. Yosho Ranryu would give us an empowered Ice Raiju, one that would let us, I don't know, flash step around the target, hitting them a bunch of times, and striking them down from above. Maybe like the old Assassinate animation. Doton already basically has a readied ability with Hollow no Zuchi, but maybe we could make it a little bit more interesting. If we're feeling really crazy, we could give it some sort of summon, but I don't know if that's super necessary. Finally, I'm fine with keeping Dream Within a Dream. We want to have a bunch of OGCDs to press during our burst window, but we want them all to associate relatively closely with our buff ready methodology. The other cool thing about having a buff ready methodology is it could change up depending on what time you use them. Right now, Trick Attack has its own independent cooldown in addition to requiring the buff to use. We could use that same methodology to create a very complicated rotation for Ninja. If we have some abilities that are on a low cooldown, some abilities on a high cooldown, we could make it so that going into a burst phase, you'd have to look at what abilities are off cooldown, figure out the best way to get all of the buffs to activate those abilities, and then weave that in while doing the rest of the stuff 14 asks for. This mitigates the main concern I have with the other change I'm making, which is removing the mug window. We don't need the mug window. Mug isn't necessary, and the 2-minute meta kinda sucks. Ninja should be a 1-minute job. Actually, in this same way, we can still have Meisui stick around. If you can only use Bunshin every other burst window, then we could have Meisui do something really interesting. Maybe Meisui reactivates Zeppo, Meppo, and Death Frog Medium as big finishers, in contrast to our Bunshin, meaning that every Tenchi Jin would have to go either one way down or the other way. That could be actually really fun. The last thing I'd like to add to Ninja, or at least investigate adding, is making Hide an actually cool and interesting ability. I'm not joking when I say Hide is the coolest theoretical thing on Ninja's kit. You go hidden, you lose aggro, and it lets you sneak around. But it is truly useless in combat, so let's change that. Hide now, instead of decreasing your speed, gives you a temporary movement speed increase, letting you better dodge enemy attacks. If you need to move quickly for a long time, you can hide, running around the arena. I also think it would be neat if this movement speed buff doesn't last indefinitely, and instead only lasts maybe like 10 seconds. So you can run quick for a small amount of time, but you can't just linger and hide forever without having the same issue as you currently do, where you start going slow and creeping around. Plus, whenever you hide, the button itself should change. It should change into a downtime finisher. Picture this. You're in the middle of a fight. The boss goes away. You hide. Now you have Assassinate. Back and better than ever. It's a fairly normal OGCD, but this time if you activate it from a rear positional, it deals massively increased damage. The enemy goes up into the air, becomes untargetable for a brief moment, you hide, solve the mechanic as necessary, and then when it drops back down, you appear behind it, doing hella damage. Ooh, it could be really fun, especially for a job without a real downtime ability. Giving it hide as a downtime, mobility positive, damage positive ability, not something you'd use every minute in a burst phase, but something that is situationally useful, could be really fun. And that's about it. Those are my ideal changes for Ninja. I think we can make this job really distinct from a lot of other jobs with only a few minor changes. And hell, I didn't even invent new skills to go in there. I'm sure we could spice up the ideas even more given an actual art budget. But tell me what you think. For all you Ninja mains out there, are my ideas interesting? Are they cool? Remember, I don't have any ability to influence what Square Enix is going to do, and hell, they probably already decided on what changes they want to make. This is for us. This is to see what the game could be if it decided to be more than what it's been. Anyway, Void, that'll about do it for me. If you enjoyed, please subscribe, and if you like the video, then like the video. Regardless, I think it's very fun, and I'm gonna talk about more jobs real soon. Take it easy, and don't trick your attack, else you get mugged in the back. Ta-ta!